Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kim Paffenroth.
Thank you. Thank you, man. Thank you all very much for having me. Thank you to Dr. Clayton and Margaret for organizing this and letting me speak to a new group about one of my favorite topics, zombies. We could probably save it for the question and answer, and there'll probably be some more points to elaborate during the question and answer, but at some point somebody's going to ask, why is a professor of religious studies talking to me about zombies? What's the hook? What happened to you to make you talk about this? I have different versions of that epiphany or whatever that I tell different groups. I think they all share certain points in common. In about 2004, somewhere around there, I started noticing that there were a lot of books about trying to find the deeper significance of pop culture phenomena. So much so that there were two competing series with almost identical titles, which are still going today. One's called Philosophy and Blank, and the other one's called Blank and Philosophy. And the blank is filled in by all different pop culture things, television, music, movies, sometimes even broader things like NASCAR or wrestling or whatever. And then there were religious, more oriented towards a faith community and a religious and Christian audience. Books that all had the title, something along the lines of Gospel According to Blank. Now some of those were, I thought, pretty straightforward. I could see, without even necessarily reading the book, could guess some of the points that the person was going to make, right? So Gospel According to Tolkien, Gospel According to Narnia, pretty overtly Christian books. Now some went a little further. Gospel According to Harry Potter, Gospel According to Star Wars. Nothing too overtly Christian in those. And some evangelicals have even been rather suspicious or put off by those phenomena. And then some went even further to things where I really don't know how they'd make the case, like the Gospel According to The Sopranos. Okay, here's a bloody television show about gangsters, and hard to see where you're going to find some moral or religious core to talk about there. Now again, I just noticed that as a phenomenon, that there were a lot of these books out there. And then it was March of 2004. The Dawn of the Dead remake came out. And I'd seen and loved and not love is never the right word for a zombie movie. I had seen and been fascinated by the original in 1978. And I hadn't really thought much about zombies in between 1978 and 2004. But I saw that movie and suddenly I was like, wow, this is something I could say something about. This is something significant to me. This is something that's remained significant to me even as I've matured and gotten interested in religious studies and changed as a person. This is a cultural phenomenon that I feel strongly about, and that I could make a case to people is something they can pay attention to and learn from. So that's where that book came from, and it just keeps going. People are much more interested in zombies than in St. Augustine, which is the other thing I work on. So there you go. All right, so if you've been on a strange faraway island and you're not familiar with zombies, well, first off, how many people have seen a zombie movie? That's pretty good cultural cachet. You can see how deeply imbued they are. All right, how many people have seen 10 or more zombie movies? Wow. Okay. All right. Good. I mean, some places I go, there would be no hands. Some places it would still be everybody would have their hand up at that point. So you just have to gauge the audience. So as seems like most of you know now, at the beginning of the 21st century, the zombie seems like it's the monster. Up until Twilight, you really didn't even hear much about vampires for quite some time. And they've really infected or spread to a lot of pop culture. I mean, I think they're still they're very film-based. Most people who say that they like zombies or like to are interested in zombie culture, what they really mean is they like to watch zombie movies. But it has gone further than that. They are big in video games, obviously, a little bit now in books, and you've even got, for the last couple of years, some kind of strange and interesting cultural phenomenon. You got your zombie walks in malls, very popular, and getting more so around this time of year, around Halloween. I was at a horror convention a couple weeks ago. Lady informed me of something I hadn't heard of before: zombie proms. All right. I personally don't think zombies are particularly erotic. I'm willing to leave that to the vampires, but some of my fans seem to think zombies are pretty sexy, so they like that part of it too. Like I say, don't necessarily have to talk about that. It like any cultural phenomena, sets up a sort of feedback loop to where the films often look like video games. Some reviewers have put them down for that reason. It looks like the video games that you're used to playing. And of course, with something like Resident Evil, it's known as both a video game and now a film franchise. So it feeds off of its own popularity. The films influence the video games, which then influence the next generation of films. So it's constantly feeding off of itself that way. All right, now, when we say zombies, what do we mean? And how is that developed, and what are the rules, right? The way you have a cross and a stake through the heart are the rules for vampires, and you really can't violate that too much, or it's not a vampire anymore. What are the rules for zombies? When you talk about zombies for the last 40-some years, you're really talking about this viral or disease-based idea. It's a very secular idea of a monster. It does not, at least ostensibly, it does not look supernatural. Now, at some point, I think, if you're a real big zombie fan and you ask all the questions that I get asked at some conferences, at some point, I think the rules break down and you have to just say, look, it's just because that's the way it is. So I think even zombie, I mean, why do they not just fall apart after a while? If they are dead and they're not breathing, why do they moan all the time, right? I mean, there's certain rules that are just there because that's how it goes, all right? So there's still a little bit of fudging on the detail, but part of the appeal is that it's, on the surface at least, offering some kind of rational explanation. We're not just saying this is magic, the way you have to at some point with vampires, and most other monsters, I think. Okay, but the story is that for reasons, again, very hazy and unexplained in most any of the movies, undecayed corpses get up and walk around. All right, they have to be in reasonably good shape. All right? Not going to have totally rotted corpses. You're not going to have people from long ago walking around. You're going to have recently decayed, recently deceased people get up and walk around. That does make it somewhat similar to the original idea of zombies as these kind of hypnotized or drugged persons under some sort of voodoo influence from some sinister force. But one of the things that's new about these zombies is they really are corpses. They're all the way dead. They're not hypnotized or drugged. They are all the way dead, and they're not under anyone's control either. People don't tell zombies to do things. They just go out and do what they do, which isn't much, but they're very single-minded and they're not under anyone's control. There is always a hint, sometimes an explicit subtext, sometimes more explicit. There's a hint that somehow we've done this to ourselves. That's why I put Promethean there. There is a sense that since corpses don't usually get up and walk around, that we must have done something wrong. Bioweapon gotten out of control, virus released, engineered and then released accidentally or on purpose. So something that we have done to cause this. It's not some natural occurrence. That's usually raised and again sort of pushed to the side in most of the movies, because most of the movies are about what happens between the zombies and the people. They're not about explanations really of the past or of the cause here. All right, so corpses get up, walk around, they attack and kill people. Their preferred method for killing people is to bite them. So they're looking like vampires a little bit, but their biting is again not at all erotic. Vampire bites are erotic. They're on the neck, look very sexual. Zombies much more likely just to tear you apart if he can, right? If he's not in too bad a shape, right? Rip open your stomach, pull out your intestines, and the films revel in showing this as much as they can, right? So it's a very unsexy attack. It's just gross, right? It's hideous. Now the further downside is that when they attack and kill you, if they don't eat you up completely, whatever's left of you, of course, will then get up and walk around and kill other people. So that's how they spread. Now, as part of that attacking and eating, of course, that's the next theme listed there. This whole idea, the whole thing that's shot through the zombie myth as created by Romero is cannibalism. The whole idea, as I'll look at in some of the films and explain at some length, it's this constant metaphor of human society, human beings consuming one another, consuming ourselves, destroying ourselves. So it is this image of great self-destructive, human self-destruction, rather than from some outside force. Another distinction, a little similar to vampires, but they've moved the target. Just as a vampire can only be killed with a stake through the heart, the zombie can only be killed by somehow destroying the brain. Probably several levels of meaning there, right? Again, the vampire is all about passion, emotion, sexuality. The zombie isn't about rationality, but the zombie's problem is that he doesn't have any rationality, right? So he is a barely functioning brain and a barely functioning body wandering around. So there's nothing emotional about killing him. It's cold, it's calculated, it's just trying to stop the motor activity. And also I think it plays into this whole idea of magic being excluded from this whole world, right? Because if this could happen, obviously destroying any of the internal organs wouldn't make any difference, so it has to be directed towards the thing that's directing the body, the brain. So in all this, a very secular, mechanical, and I'd say very, very modern kind of monster, trying to get rid of all the religious and magical overtones of previous creatures. Oops. Well, why so popular right now? Now, most audiences, again, if they haven't watched zombie films for very long or read zombie books, 9/11 is the first thing they mention. They say, look, it must be our fear of terrorism. We're afraid of terrorism, so now we're afraid of this huge, massive apocalypse of zombies taking over. That certainly plays into it. That's why I call my talk Primal Fears and Contemporary Anxieties. I think the contemporary anxiety has to include 9/11. That's obviously on all our minds, at least in the US. But if you check the timeline, zombies were getting pretty popular quite a bit before 9/11. The first Resident Evil game I checked was released in 1996. The films that were coming out in the early 2000s would have already been in production before 9/11. So this was something that was still going and in a way ongoing since the first zombie film, Night of the Living Dead, in 1968. So you got a long time period with increasing and then suddenly dramatically increasing popularity. Okay, so can't narrow it down to one particular event like 9/11. So what's the general sense in which these monsters would be so popular? Well, as I say, some aspects seem to embody a timeless or primal fear or fears that we have. Fear of death, and a particular version of that I think a lot of people don't pick up on or bear some explanation. Not just fear of death, but fear of the dead. That's been an important thing I've thought about with these creatures. Corpses make us uncomfortable, and part of that, and it's not just the fact of our own mortality, that they remind us of that, and that makes us uncomfortable too. But there is something strange, struggling for the right word here, strange, off-putting, scary about a corpse. Now then you add into the element that now the corpse is behaving in a way that it's not supposed to, right? It's not lying down anymore, it's walking around. So now it's more unnatural. That's what I'm trying to get at with that explanation. There's something so deeply unnatural about these things. And as has been pointed out on several panels that I've been on, again, I keep underlining the differences with vampires. On the surface, zombie looks a lot like a vampire. undead, bites you, turns you into one of them. Another big difference, however, between the zombie and the vampire is, if you think about it, even though the movies usually show the people being very afraid of becoming vampires, it's very hard to articulate why exactly if you think about it. Because if you think about a vampire, it's a pretty good deal. You get to be eternally young, eternally sexy, you're super strong, you can fly, and okay, you just have to kill somebody every night or so, or every couple nights. That's, to some of us, that would be beneficial, right? I mean, you can see the advantage to being a vampire. Zero advantages to being a zombie, right? You're just you, only really stupid and uncoordinated. And there's pieces dropping off of you. You're falling apart, right? And you smell bad. Nobody likes you, all right? If you're a vampire, people like you, all right? So in our imagination, if we imagine ourselves as a vampire, we imagine ourselves, well, it would be just me, only with these superpowers. And again, I have to kill people all the time. All right, that's the downside, maybe. But zombies, you can't make that claim. It's like me, only worse. So I definitely don't want to become one of these things. It's this hybrid nature that I already alluded to with the strangeness or the uncomfortableness that a corpse gives us. This hybrid nature is of any human monster. If you think back to all your mythological monsters from ancient Greek and Roman mythology, they're all somehow combinations of human and something else, or they're mostly that. A zombie's, again, straddling that boundary between live and dead. It's sort of dead, but it's moving around and doing things, so it's sort of alive. And things that are combinations, things that straddle boundaries, the technical term is liminal, they always make us uncomfortable. They don't fit a category. We can't deal with them conceptually, never mind how we would deal with them physically or emotionally. The fact that you've got huge numbers of people, and that is what zombies are, I'll get into that more in a minute, but the fact that you've got huge numbers of people wandering around, biting and killing other people, I do think visually just makes the zombie attacks much worse, right? It's unpleasant enough, or some people find it exciting, I guess, to watch people being eaten by sharks or piranhas or bears or whatever horror thing you want to pick, right? But seeing you being killed and eaten by another person, especially a person who normally, I guess, would look harmless, a little girl or a grandmotherly figure, and the movies do play around with those images, that's especially disturbing, right? So the whole attack, never mind the rending and tearing and bleeding, never mind all the things that go with it just because it's an attack, is made that much more horrible. But then it also goes in the other direction. That if you're being attacked by piranhas or sharks or wolves, you are empowered, therefore, to kill them with absolute impunity, right? There's no moral implications to that. You're being attacked by an animal. You kill it if you can. But if you're being attacked by these things that look like people, and in some cases seem to have some residual memories of who they were, well, now killing them, especially killing them en masse, must become deeply disturbing both to the characters in the movie and us watching the characters go about this. All right, so it's a deeply dehumanizing process to the characters in the film. Now, I do say, as I note there just parenthetically, I do think that definitely cuts both ways, right? In other words, the whole appeal, or a big part of the appeal, I think, of zombie video games is exactly that you can shoot people in the face and not feel bad about it. That's the appeal of Resident Evil or House of the Dead or any of the video game aspects, all right? Because deep down, there is something appealing about that activity, but we want the moral component removed from it. And you just say, well, it's only a zombie, so it doesn't matter. And you can just rack up as many kills as you want on the game. So that aspect definitely cuts both ways. It makes the zombie more appealing as a target, and also makes it more disturbing as a narrative element in the story. Now, I think all these elements that I've listed so far would have existed 10 years ago, and they'll exist 10 years from now, 100 years from now. Those seem pretty timeless. I think we're always going to be afraid of those things and always fascinated and morbidly fascinated by those aspects. Some things, though, I do think have changed and definitely increased in the last 30 or 40 years since zombies were introduced. Part of the problem or the downside of becoming a zombie, besides the gross physical things I just listed, is that you become part of this nameless, anonymous horde, right? You just wander around with other zombies. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to see that as a pretty straightforward metaphor for what we all fear about the modern world. Loss of our own individuality, the feeling that we don't matter, the feeling that we're alienated from other people, that the things we do in life are going to ultimately, or maybe even very soon, amount to nothing. The zombie just makes that fear very gross and concrete, because he doesn't have any mind, any memory, any thoughts, and no particular desires other than to kill, right? So he's embodying, I think, a very modern feeling and fear of the loss of meaning and individuality. So now you're not just going to turn into a rotting corpse, that's bad enough. You're going to turn into a rotting corpse who's part of a nameless, anonymous horde. I do think one of the things that has increased since 9/11, and which we see explicit images put into some of the movies, are images of the other. The zombie is the other. I think that plays off of our current fear of terrorism. Some of the threats I listed a minute ago, that this terrorism may take the form of biological threats that would cause horrible plagues. The zombie is just a version, and a particularly horrible version of that. However, I would also say at the other end, if you think about zombies, they're not very good symbols of the other. And this is why I partly object to this interpretation. Some people have gone really far on, well, zombies just represent Muslims or terrorists or third world uprisings or whatever. They try to force it into very much zombies are the other. And I agree that that's definitely an element, and the movies play around with that imagery. But since all the zombies are us, they're your neighbors, right? When the zombie apocalypse happens, they don't ship them over from somewhere else. Think of the beginning of the Dawn of the Dead remake. That's probably the most harrowing. Who does she first get attacked by? Her neighbor and then her boyfriend, right? So it's hard to see them as merely or only or primarily representing the other. I think they do represent some deep fear we have of those closest to us. Intimacy and trust, and the idea that those closest to us may end up preying on us or hurting us in unexpected and horrible ways. And again, I would say that is I can't say it's only a modern fear, but it's definitely one that I see expressed more in our current world. All right, so far I've gone a little bit into the implications of this strange, gory genre and this strange, simplistic kind of monster. But what's it all mean? All right, I have a very short clip from a movie long before your time. This is the original Dawn of the Dead. I will probably figure out how to make it full screen, or maybe. It's just 4.5 minutes. You got 3 scenes in which the characters begin to move in the direction of the interpretation I'm going to give. They offer the interpretation that I'm trying to give here to zombies. Can I get the lights down here? You all can't see that very well, can you? Shoot. I've seen it a little bit there. Yeah. Oh, all right. Thank you.
Let's get out of here. They can't get up here. Yeah, you can't go down there. Let's check it out.
Down. I don't think they can get into the stores.
I have many of them up on the second floor.
The big department stores usually use both floors.
We can get in up top.
Okay. Guess the power is not off in this area. Could be nuclear.
What are they doing? Why are they coming?
Some kind of instinct, memory, what they used to do. This is an important place in their lives.
Alright, just gotta laugh. Oops, sorry. There we go. All right. So first, the first clip, when they first look at the zombies up. Oh, and of course, you notice the whole mall thing, right? We'll get to that in a minute. But it's Romero that associated zombies forever with malls. And he doesn't follow through on every movie. That's the only movie that he does that in, but that one really stuck and resonated. We always think of zombies as walking around malls. All right? And in fact, if you go to a zombie march, it's almost always at a mall. And if you haven't done one yet, go ahead. They're lots of fun. It's really fun to walk around a mall as a zombie, I can tell you. But the conclusion that's drawn from that is, well, why do they come here? And Steve's answer in the first clip is, this was an important place in their lives. All right, so that's that's partly the threat of zombieism, is that you will repeat whatever it is you found particularly happy, fulfilling, interesting in life. Now the humor, and that what makes us all laugh uncomfortably, is that an uncomfortable number of people seem to have found malls as the place they wanted to then spend the rest of eternity. right? Now, we don't know from the movies. They don't explore and see how many people have wandered back to churches or synagogues or sporting arenas or whatever, but the implication seems to be the malls are the place to be. Malls are the place that zombies are most attracted to. Now, the general conclusion to draw from that is that zombies are doomed to repeat their lived behavior. That there isn't, other than the whole killing and eating people thing, there isn't that much difference between zombies and people. They just go about doing what they did in life. As I note there, and as I'll note in a minute for a different quotation, but just consider in general, the depiction of the damned in Dante's Inferno. To me, what's always made that depiction so powerful is it's not the accoutrements, it's not the decorations of hell, the different devils and tortures. It's that the people are condemned to endlessly repeat their sinful and now painful behavior. The gluttons in hell are still gluttonous. They are still hugely obese and gluttonous. The lustful are still chasing after one another. The suicides are constantly being destroyed, the way they killed themselves. This seems to be pretty close, again, in a very secular, gross, physical way. We've taken out all the Christian trappings of it, but it seems to just take that over into a secular, physical version. It is, and that is Romero's basic assumption about human nature, that we are creatures of habit, that we are creatures who learn things and then repeat them over and over. And in that, I don't think he's that far off. Now, the second clip then applies that. All right, if the zombies are just doing what they always did, then Peter can say in the second clip that they're simply us. They're not really monsters. They're just human beings, as I described them before, human beings minus very much reasoning capacity. Creatures of habit, just doing what they always did. So there's not really a zombie nature, there's just a sinful, debased, minimal human nature that now continues and abides in the zombies, to which we are all headed if we ever get bitten by any of them. So zombies are merely humans devoid of reason, slaves to this appetite, incapable of change now. And again, the whole image with the mall. Everybody's trying to get into the mall. The zombies, you saw them there slapping against the glass. They're always going to be there trying to get in the mall. Our four living characters have tried very hard and through extreme bloody violence at that point to get into the mall. And then later in the film, when the bad guys show up, they break their way into the mall. Everybody's after the same thing, is what I'm trying to illustrate there. Zombies, supposedly good humans, supposedly bad humans, they're all after the same thing. There's not really very much to choose between them. And I give you the quote there from Inferno that makes I think the most explicit connection that I needed and that I hung a lot of my interpretation on. A very explicit connection between how Dante sees the damned and how Romero sees the zombies. Dante describes the damned as, I learn that to this place of punishment all those who sin in lust have been condemned, those who make reason slave to appetite. Reason slave to appetite. That you don't really need too much more to describe a zombie. No reason, just appetite. One of the things that Romero does with that image that I spell out there is if you look at the Romero films, and I think a lot of the things that are based directly or indirectly on his work, is that one of the narrative things you have to do with the zombie is, because they're so minimal, they don't have any superpowers, they're not hard to kill, so what do you do with these things to make the movie more interesting, or the book, or the video game? Less so the video game. I think video games are mostly about zombies as targets. But at least if you have a plot, if you have a narrative, if you have characters that you want to develop in the course of the book or in the course of the 2 hours of the movie. One frequent technique, and I think this gets to how Romero's looking at human nature, and I think it also fits with Dante's depiction of why some sins are worse and are further down in hell, is that one thing he likes to do, Romero, is to make the living characters actually turn out to be much worse than the zombies. Worse both in the sense of it's harder to avoid the living characters because they're smarter, more resourceful, have more tools at their disposal, and also worse in the sense of they are trying to do something worse. They are misusing their still remaining human faculties, and they are pursuing things rationally, coldly, deliberately. Now again, if you just think about the zombies, as unpleasant as it will be when a zombie kills you, it's over pretty quick, right? He bites you, you die, right? It's only humans, only living humans, that can think of the more lingering types of pain, right? Torture. A zombie's not going to torture you to death. He's just going to kill you as quickly as he can. A human, another human, an evil human, may very well like to torture you for a long time or rape you repeatedly. Zombie can't do that, all right? And Romero makes the most of that. He fills his later movies, everything pretty much after Night, with human characters that are a much bigger threat, living human characters that are a much bigger threat than the zombies. You get that in Day of the Dead with Captain Rhodes, just this figure of just complete malice and complete lack of concern for anybody else, just enjoys killing people. As I said, the people who break into the mall later, the biker gang, just greed, and greed again in completely stupid, self-destructive ways. If you watch the original, when the bikers break into the mall, they just grab the craziest stuff, right? At one point they grab a bowling ball. What are you going to do with a bowling ball in a zombie apocalypse, right? They grab TVs. Well, we've already seen several times, and this is long before cable, but it wouldn't matter. It was long before VCRs. You can't do anything with a TV in a post-apocalyptic world. There's no electricity, and there's no television stations, and there's no cable. So mindless greed almost. But later, and this is closer to your time frame, if you saw Land of the Dead a few years ago, the Dennis Hopper character in that, the guy who's running the show, he's probably Romero's greatest villain because he's diabolical, he's driven, he's resourceful, and he's highly intelligent, and he can make life miserable, much more miserable for people than the zombies can. Right? In other words, at a certain point in the zombie films and in the books, the zombies almost just have to become like a given, right? Like living in a world where there's, you know, bad weather or earthquakes or something, right? Okay, it's bad, it's threatening, but we can work with that, right? We can make walls, we can barricade the place, we can work with that. Romero's point over and over is, but we really can't work with one another if one of us decides to be evil. Then we've got a real problem. Zombies I can barricade myself against. You all I can't. And yet, of course, we have to live amongst ourselves. You definitely would have seen that in the Dawn remake. The Steve character in the Dawn remake dooms them all just because he's just being such a prick at that point, or throughout the movie, that he just doesn't cooperate with anyone, you know, and he only looks out for himself, and therefore he gets everybody killed. And finally, I probably should note, I was just going to move on to the next point, I probably should note, the whole middle of the Dawn, of the original Dawn, is fascinating for this final point I make there under the way that living humans pose a threat to us. The whole middle of the original Dawn of the Dead is just about them being in the mall bored. They're just bored out of their minds. And that seems to be really a more disturbing prospect than being chased and killed by a zombie, right? That you could just sit there just being bored and not know what to do. Oh, forever, or at least until you die of natural causes, I guess, right? It's this idea of, as Pascal observed, why is it so horrible to be in solitary confinement if you're in prison? It should be rather more pleasant because you're not around these other guys who might hurt you, right? And yet solitary confinement is consistently used as the worst kind of punishment in a lot of prison situations, because it subjects you to having to sit by yourself, with nothing to do, and the boredom and despair would be much worse than any physical interaction, even if it was a very unpleasant, violent physical interaction. The middle of the original Dawn of the Dead provides that. They're in the mall, they're safe, and they're completely miserable. Better to be, as at the end, right? Better to be in a helicopter with just a little bit of fuel, because at least you're out doing something. At least you have a chance. Oh, and you did notice at the end there how happy the zombies are, right? Zombies in the mall aren't bored because they're zombies. But people are supposed to have better aspirations than that. They're supposed to want more than just to wander. All right. One of the big points I made in the book, and that I've made and that I've expanded and thought of since, and especially as I've seen more movies since that, one of Romero's things, and the other zombie films follow this to some extent if they want. One direction you can take it in is Romero very much saw his mission, his goal as an artist, was to offer social criticism. And for him, that meant social criticism of the U.S. And since he's been making these films now for over 40 years, a social criticism that changes quite a bit over time as he sees new objects, new aspects of American life that he finds distasteful or immoral. And in that sense, and we can talk about this, in that sense I do see him, although he is a lapsed Catholic, I do see him very much, almost in spite of himself, fulfilling the role of an Old Testament prophet. He is very angry at his society for its injustices. He doesn't choose to do it through prophecy, he chooses to do it through his art, but I think he provides a scathing critique that is recognizable as a kind of prophetic critique. As I say, with the whole mall thing, consumerism, that's kind of his contribution, was to associate zombies with this scathing yet extremely hilarious critique of American consumerism. And I do sometimes confuse that, even in my own mind, with like materialism or greed. And they're certainly related. But he does mean something a little bit worse than that, I guess. Because at least with materialism or greed, at least you have something. Now, you might have something that doesn't totally satisfy you, and that's where I think the problem is with materialism. But consumerism is just this desire to get, not to have, or not even necessarily to get. Right? That's one of the great frustrations of the mall. When you go to the mall, what do you spend 99% of your time doing? It's not buying things, it's not getting things, it's certainly not having things, it's just looking at things. Right? Often that you can't afford. Right? But you're just like, right? You do take on even the posture of a zombie at that point. Right? And Romero makes fun of that, and I think that we all respond to that, again, with an uncomfortable sort of laugh, because we all know that we're like that, especially if you go to high-end malls, right, with stores that you really can't afford. At least I can't afford, right? Sephora or something. Or what's the other? Well, lots of stores. And you don't, and it's funny, well, I was going to say you don't do that with other things. You do, I guess you do sometimes. I mean, the Food Network is sort of like that, right? It shows you a bunch of food that you're not going to eat. And that's kind of fun and kind of frustrating. So all right, I was going to say that it's not like that with food, but it is. All right, so it's even worse than I thought. All right. Racism, definitely. Throughout the films, every Romero film has a black protagonist. Or, in the case of Land, yeah, even in the case of Land, okay? Has a black protagonist who is somehow, well, we'll just leave it at that. I think I was going to say somehow flawed, but that's in some of the movies and not in some of the others. He just wants to constantly put that out there as part of his critique of American society, is that we are not as integrated or as equal as we often like to congratulate ourselves on being. That there's a lot, either in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or now in the beginning of the 21st century, there's still a lot of residual racism, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. Sexism is definitely something that Romero grew with. If you look at the original, if you ever see the original Night of the Living Dead, the female lead there is a very stereotypical helpless female. She's even somewhat beyond stereotypical. Once she sees a zombie, she sort of just goes catatonic. And she just is completely hysterical, and she's either whimpering and cringing or screaming. So the males in the movie have to do their best to protect her. And again, I'd say that's pretty old school, stereotypical 1950s depiction of women, especially in horror movies, right? through the rest of the corpus of his movies, and definitely in something like the Dawn of the Dead remake, you see a lot less of that, and you see increasingly strong female characters through the movies. You saw Fran in the original Dawn, Sarah in Day of the Dead, and then Anna in the Dawn remake. They grow into the role of something akin to the Sigourney Weaver character in Aliens, right? Or the Sarah Connor character in Terminator, right? They're out there killing zombies just as much as the boys, and I think Romero sees that as, again, something that he's evolving a more modern, more enlightened point of view on. And especially I would say in the most recent, actually it's not the most recent now, 2005, Land of the Dead. I think Romero's thinking more and more there, and getting more and more explicit, and perhaps more and more focused in his criticism about this idea, and this was partly me trying to see how he was matching up with a Hebrew prophet. I think Romero's getting more and more focused at that point on American exceptionalism and classism, our sense of class and our sense of making sure that there is an underclass in our society for us to exploit, if we are in the upper class, for us to exploit and better our own position. I would say that seems to me pretty blatant in Land of the Dead, where in Land of the Dead you've got several tiers, right? Kaufman, the evil genius, lives at the top of a tower, nice penthouse. His minions live at the bottom of the tower. Then you got a bunch of poor and starving people living outside of the tower but still walled in and safe from the zombies, relatively safe from the zombies. And then you have the zombies surrounding the city, banging on the walls trying to get in. Seems pretty clear that he's got a very hierarchical society set up there, and one that is maintained only for the benefit of those at the top. Again, the people at the bottom are relatively safe, but aren't enjoying or having the goods shared amongst these people. And especially how the city's depicted. It's constantly depicted there as glowing in the distance. And it really does seem like this is supposed to be ironic, that this is some shining city. And yet when Kaufman describes what a great leader he is of his city, he very tellingly describes it as, I gave the people games and vices, bread and circus, right? He gives them something to do something to do that they pay for, by the way, right? They don't get the games and vices for free, but he provides that to them for money, but he thinks that's a community service. And he thinks, again, it keeps them distracted from the horrors of a zombie world that they live in. He definitely repeats the Reagan line when one of his henchmen threatens him. He shrieks, "We don't negotiate with terrorists." Right? So he's seeing any threat to his hierarchy and to his exploitation of these people. He's seeing that as a terrorist act and not as an act of revolution. And speaking of revolution, of course, that's what the whole Land of the Dead is about. The zombies revolt. They get smart. They get fed up with having the live humans come to their peaceful town and take all their stuff. And so they march against the city. And they tear it down. To which, as Kaufman is being attacked by them, he screams twice no less, "You have no right. No right. You have no right to do this thing." All right? It's unlawful almost, as though the zombies would care, right? Or as though, and the further irony, as though he ever cared when he was exploiting all the people in his city, right? His only rule that he ever lived by was might makes right. He had the ability to exploit other people, so he did. So he has no room to complain if the zombies now are more powerful and can take back what he has stolen. All right. Since this is about prospects, human prospects, what's the human prospect during a zombie apocalypse? Well, for most of us, it's probably about 27 minutes before we're killed and eaten. But what is he trying to set up here? And for that, I would just draw your attention to the end of the original Night of the Living Dead. Again, if you haven't seen it, go out and see it. It's a very short film. It's like 87 minutes or something. It's public domain, so it's free on YouTube. Everyone agrees when they see that movie that the ending is the bleakest, most despairing ending of any of the zombie movies. Some people go even further and say it's the bleakest, most despairing ending they've ever seen of any movie. Just makes you want to go out and kill yourself, right? But, well, you may ask, oh, does everybody die? Well, ironically, no. That's the irony. At the end of Night of the Living Dead, all the people we followed in the story, the protagonists, they're all dead. But order has been restored. The movie ends with the police and National Guard and assorted people with guns coming into the area and killing all the zombies. Order has been restored, and yet we don't feel good about it, right? Because narratively it violates our sense of what should happen in that movie. What should happen is that the people who fought courageously and resourcefully, who did the best they could to fight the zombies, we want them to win, and they don't. And who are these people coming into the area just killing everything in sight, including one of our protagonists? Ostensibly, or on the face of it, they are the forces of law and order. But again, I would hope from my description of what Romero thinks of modern American society, to have law and order restored isn't such a good thing. Or it's not unambiguously good. So unlike any typical 1950s or previous, or even 1960s or previous horror movie, law and order being restored for Romero is not a good thing. Because you are just perpetuating, prolonging, and making worse this racist, elitist, arrogant, sinful society. Compare that with the ending of the original Dawn that you saw, right? Which is very similar to the ending either of Day or of Land. All right, so it's kind of his more favorite ending. And in Dawn, it's the most extreme. Two people fly off into the sunrise, maybe to crash and die 5 minutes later, maybe to just simply run out of gas later and land somewhere where there's a bazillion zombies and they're all eaten, maybe to go somewhere really great. We don't know. Completely open-ended, completely ambiguous, but I think for Romero better than having society maintain. So what he's really into, what he really likes, is to show society being destroyed and maybe 2 or 3 people at the end surviving, perhaps to reconstitute something. He's very vague on what that might be, though it's always interracial. The groups that survive at the end are always composed of blacks and whites. And they seem to be the people who, in the course of the narrative, have been least invested in the previously existing society. Those who showed the most suspicion of capitalism and consumerism, those who showed the least tendency towards mindless violence. So he does have this very tentative kind of hope at the end. But it is summed up at the end of a different movie, and where his cynicism comes out, is he ends another movie, he ends Diary, with the line, "Are we worth saving? You tell me." And I think the rhetorical question and the expected answer is, no, not really. So, put him down, in my analysis, I guess, as a optimistic nihilist, right? He likes to destroy the world, but he likes to show you a handful of people who we have at least some small amount of evidence might reconstitute something better than our present sinful society. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it.
Time for some questions.
Plenty. Sir, in the middle.
What do you think Romero would say about modern films, say like Zombieland, for instance, where the ending obviously isn't the 4 protagonists drive off in their car after having killed
Lots of zombies.
Yeah.
You know, I think he would enjoy the killing lots of zombies part. I mean, he would like that, and he likes the humor. You know, I mean, you saw it in Dawn of the Dead. He likes the humorous part, but yeah, I wonder if it would be too upbeat for him. Now that being said, I shouldn't go too far out on a limb on that, because he did provide blurbs for Shaun of the Dead, which I guess doesn't have a completely. Yeah, it has a. Who's alive at the end of Shaun of the Dead? Most of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So. Well, dead-ish, yeah, dead-ish. So now that I think about his glowing approval of Shaun, maybe he wouldn't. He might be more upbeat about that than I thought at first. Yeah. So I think he'd be in favor of it.
I think that your discussion about zombies as being slaves to appetite is pretty spot on. The question that I would have would be about one Romero film and then transition to the Resident Evil films.
Okay.
We've seen those. But in Land of the Dead, you mentioned it very briefly that the zombies get smart.
Uh-huh.
That there's this implication of reason that leads them to have all they can stand so they can't stand some more, and they go and they make a conscious effort to go and destroy. You see in the Resident Evil films with the Nemesis character, this idea that they're not just slaves to appetite, but they're slaves to appetite with the ability to reason. Do you think that plays into your original conception of zombies? And if not, how does that alter this thinking?
Well, see, that is where it's different than Dante's Inferno. Once you go to Dante's Inferno, you're stuck there and you're never going to change. Now, I do think Romero's zombies seem capable of change, especially in Day and Land. So if he had any hope at all, and what I do, and actually what I do in some of my own zombie fiction is, if he had any hope, it would be that the zombies are getting more civilized as they go, and the humans are getting worse. So I think we will eventually reach equilibrium, which that's pretty much how I take the end of Land, is that the evil of Kaufman, the evil of an exaggerated version of present U.S. society has been wiped out. The labor leader is left to organize his little city. The people in the tank are left to go off to Canada, right? Because Canada is nicer than the U.S., so they're going to go off there. And the zombies are left just to be themselves. So, bizarrely, that's like his optimistic vision. And I shouldn't have said, I mean, they don't suddenly get smart. I mean, I think he was laying the groundwork for that with Bub in Day. It seems like he had smart zombies in mind for a while before that. Is it close to?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that we're accustomed to seeing are things like Alien versus Predator, you know, Frankenstein versus the Wolfman, those sorts of things.
Okay.
Are there zombie films that do something like that? Have zombies pitted against another whole different class of creature?
I don't read it, but I guess that's the Marvel Zombies thing, isn't it? I mean, more or less, sort of. I mean, we're going to turn them, or we're going to turn superheroes into zombies, but then they still have to fight things, don't they?
Usually each other.
Yeah. Okay. So you'd have Spider-Man versus Captain America in zombie form.
Yes.
That sounds close enough. Although I never liked mashups for that reason. I mean, it seems like these things should exist in their own separate universes, and not crossover. But I understand the market. Oh, and the other part of your question was on Resident Evil. I knew there was something I was leaving out. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure about the smart zombies in relation to Resident Evil. I find the Resident Evil movies so, you know, except for Mila, they're so utterly forgettable that I don't know what to say about them. And although I do think it was the fourth one. Is it the fourth one where they keep cloning her?
The
third
one.
Okay, the third one they keep cloning. I did think that was an interesting take, just in terms of her character is now, well, both indestructible, because you can just keep making more of her, but also capable of being killed infinitely, right? Because they just keep piling up dead bodies, right? So I thought that was a bizarre but interesting take on her role there. Was indestructible but infinitely suffering, infinitely killable. Sir.
What would you say about, like, I don't know how zombies, the recent I Am Legend movie?
Yeah.
Where they're kind of like vampires
Yep.
But how the protagonist is trying to save them, rather than
Yep.
them being like just forgotten.
Yep. I mean, the whole history between Romero and I Am Legend is you know, I mean, I guess it's sort of come full circle at that point, because he, even though there have now been, what, 3 film versions of I Am Legend, 2 long ago, the Will Smith that you're thinking of, Romero said that Night of the Living Dead was based, in his mind, on the situation in in the original I Am Legend, I guess it's not a novel quite, the novella of I Am Legend. And in the novella, they're described as vampire-like. That's what the character thinks they are. And yet, they do have certain zombie characteristics, right? They attack en masse. They don't attack singly like vampires. Right, they're not afraid of crosses, right? So that they're lacking some of the vampire aspects. So I Am Legend is an interesting kind of hybrid that Romero took in one direction, and then, as you say, when they brought it back, I don't even know what he called. Did they just call them the infected in that, the way they did in 28 Days Later? Okay. Well, again, they're not supernatural. They're somehow infected people. So you have that, and that raises the whole issue, as you say, of you then have some moral responsibility not just to shoot them in the head, right? Which I think is a big part of that story, as it is in 28 Days Later, too. The cameraman.
Assuming it's the hypothetical zombie apocalypse is upon us, what is in your zombie survival kit?
Yeah. That in technical terms, that's called a bug-out bag, which I did not know until I started researching this stuff. You're supposed to have a bug-out bag, which would probably have a lot more firearms than mine. I don't own any guns. It's very embarrassing as a zombie apocalypse expert not to have more guns. But on the other hand, I feel sort of good about that. Water, food. I do have a hatchet in mine. Yeah, shovel. You got to be able to dig. Yeah. And the reason it's a bug-out bag, it's supposed to be small enough that you toss it in the back of the car and make your escape. I don't keep my car gassed up enough. It's just too expensive. That's going to be a huge problem. Miss, ma'am. Oh, sir.
I was wondering, since you had said that for zombie films what's been kind of fascinating us now is just like, for instance, like the rise of technology just kind of becoming, I guess, blended into our kind of global community that's kind of being established through the internet and everything. Do you suppose that in the future zombie films will still have an influence, or do you suppose that's just going to fall and everyone's just going to kind of forget about it in the future? Do you think they'll still keep going?
Oh, I think they're adaptable enough. I mean, I think you have to do something with them. Like I said, I mean, you either have to make them fast, or you got to make them smart, or you got to focus on the human characters and the evils that they do to one another while these zombies are milling around outside, right? Like I have been recommending to everybody at the conference the Walking Dead miniseries in a couple weeks. If it's anything like the comic book, that final point is going to be the main point. Right? Zombies are just kind of milling around outside while people bicker and cheat on each other and hurt each other and kill each other inside some kind of barricaded place. So for something with such laughably limited narrative possibilities as a walking corpse that does nothing other than stagger around, I think, therefore, it's almost a blank slate that you can keep putting new stuff on.
Could you comment about the development of the zombie genre in relationship to the body snatcher movies, which seem to be related but different? And also, my understanding is that the body snatcher original movie arose partly out of the concern about communism. And then, you have the great short story Lenin and the Ants. So there just seems to be a kind of trajectory in which even the zombie genre can be traced back to the fear of communism.
That was another. The pod people are another influence besides the I Am Legend vampires on Romero's creation of this new thing, which he didn't. I should have noted. He didn't even call it a zombie in the first movie, right? And I think they only say it once in Dawn. They only call. They just They call them ghouls one time, because that's what they are. They hang out and kill and eat people. But I think other than that, they just call them or those things. But the threat, the threat of pod people and the threat of what we thought was the threat of communism is that it's going to turn you into one of them. And that definitely carries over into zombies. And that being one of them isn't going to be any fun. Which I guess is how we looked at communism, right? We're going to all stand around waiting in line for toilet paper. It's just not going to be a pleasant existence. I don't know any specific influences beyond that. I just know historically Romero said that was another influence on him when he was constructing this monster.
The pod people return to their normal lives and continue this kind of unthinking run. So
it would be like the mall people.
Yeah, except that they're actually doing actions, right? They're more coordinated, and I guess so there's that difference between them.
But then it's not you anymore, is it? It's going to be the pod person. Yeah. So I don't know if that's better or worse. I guess it's worse, because I guess it does raise interesting questions of philosophical questions of identity, right? Because now the pod person's taken over your life, but it's not you anymore. Whereas when you become a zombie, it's sort of you, but the gamma version of you, it's way down. So you still exist, but not in any way that you want to. Whereas I guess the pod person has taken over your identity. Yeah, he's more like identity theft. Worse. Sir?
I was interested in your comparison between zombies being slaves to appetites and Dante's Inferno. And I haven't seen that many zombie films, but the ones I have seen, it seems that they are slaves to distinctively to the appetite of wanting to eat people, right? But that's different, significantly different than what Dante is doing, right? So you've got certain kinds of disordered desires or appetites for particular things. And I wondered if, is there any difference between, say, Romero's take on the zombies, like where they actually have an appetite for wandering in the balls? Or is it just that they like to be in that kind of place, but ultimately their appetites are driven toward eating people?
Right.
So if they are really just doomed to repeat their lived behavior, how is that compatible with sort of the standard take on zombies, just kind of reduced to this one appetite?
Right. Again, I think, and he has said as much in interviews, it's like, we were just making it up as we go along. So it is narrative driven. So yeah, the fact, but I suppose he could try to underline it at the end when all the food has left the mall, right? The people are all either dead or flown away in a helicopter. The zombies still want to be there, so they do seem to have some. It seems like Peter was right when he said they just want to be in here. They don't want us particularly. Now, is that violating the rules of zombieism? Sure, but it makes the film work the way Romero wanted it to. And that is the kind of question that fans do get very fixated on. It's like they don't want the rules to be broken at all. And yet, I think if you're going to tell a good story, you're not beholden to the rules that you made up in the first place.
Right. It seems there's less continuity between a sort of pre-zombie and post-zombie person, and versus a sort of normal living human being in Dante, and that same.
Oh, sure.
There's more continuity in Dante.
Oh yeah. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, Dante can talk to the damned. They remember. Well, they do have a funny relationship to memory, though, right? They remember the future, not the past. And they're always asking Dante what's happening in the present, because that's right at the meeting of past and future.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name. Farinata, the one general who comes up and asks.
Up out of the burning coffin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are memory problems even there. But yes, I agree. There's a greater sense of there's a more clear continuity of identity, such that you can say these are you're you and you're you and you're you and you're you.
Question over here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I kept moving around. Yes, sir.
Earlier you said how the survivors were the protagonists were generally the racial, less into all that stuff in society.
Okay.
But 28 days later, they met the criteria set for the guy ended up becoming pretty much mindless like a zombie, killing all the other living people. They might have been bad people, but he killed them or helped the zombies get to them.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
I wasn't quite sure how you were connecting that. What was the beginning of your...
Like
right.
The one guy...
The one dead soldier, zombie. Oh, no, he's not. They're not dead in 28 Days Later.
He woke up in the hospital.
Okay.
Right, and he was like least connected to society, supposedly.
Okay.
But he ended up becoming essentially a living, mindless zombie, killing these soldiers that were alive.
Okay. Who were threatening to rape the two women, right?
They were, but you know, instead of the like, I forget exactly how you phrased it, but like, how do you react to that? Him becoming pretty much a zombie. I mean, in the end, he was the good guy, but pretty much converted for a little bit.
Oh yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem in that movie with seeing the soldiers as the real villains, or at least the worst villains, because they know what they're doing, and especially there, I thought their rationalization was pretty thin, right? Oh, we just want to make babies. Oh yeah, well, right, sure. Just happens to include the inconvenience of repeated rape, right? So I thought that their rationalization there was particularly monstrous, whereas the infected, even though they're still alive, I guess, right? They seem totally out of control and totally incapable of reason or self-control. That's the point. The infected lack self-control. The soldiers have self-control but choose to do these monstrous things.
So the man was essentially a justification of survival. Like
yeah.
Rational, decent moral survival.
Justifiable, I'll go with, right? Just like I don't think there's really a just war, but there are justifiable ones. I'm willing to go that far.
How come there's a lack of a leader?
He played around with that in Land, where the one zombie does look like he's the leader.
That does look like not definitively a leader.
No.
It does look like maybe one.
Right. Well, I think it would play.
Plans, do they go on commands? Let's meet at the mall or something.
No. I think in that one, it's just herd mentality.
Let's eat this person over here. Let's eat that one over there.
Yep.
I like her take on the communism thing a little more than that. Like we're zombies. You think the zombies as people just get up, go get their card, and the debit card, march down to this store and do this and do that. So like socialism, Marxism, zombies,
right?
Doing inane things and absolutely nothing. It's sedentary. I was just wondering if there was a leader zombie guy.
There isn't until Land, and I think it probably does. Well, there isn't until Land, but yet the zombies throughout the films are much more. They're much better organized than the people, because the people are always fighting over who gets to be leader, right? That's the most explicit in the first film, where the two guys are yelling at each other. I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. And meanwhile, the zombies are tearing down the barricades. And I think that's part of Romero's point about human nature, is that our will to power, our desire to rule over other people, sometimes overrules our desire for self-preservation. Whereas the zombies are just they're just kind of doing their thing, but they're just so inexorable about it, it gets done, right? If you just keep clawing at the barricade long enough, and you don't care if your fingernails all get torn off in the process, you'll get through the barricade while those stupid people are fighting each other inside the house. Sir.
I have a two-part question. I haven't seen any of the original zombie movies. None of the 24-hour, night, dawn, day, everything.
Okay.
Is the cause of why the zombies are there ever explained in those movies?
Very half-bakedly, if that's an adverb, and with complete inconsistency. I mean, in Night it says it's radiation from a returning satellite. So that's where I got the Promethean idea. It's like, well, we shot this thing up into space to try to explore and maybe take over other planets, and instead it falls back on us and turns us into zombies. In Dawn, I don't think they say anything in Dawn except except for the tagline, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. So that's almost giving it a supernatural explanation. You probably saw the Dawn remake. That's where Anna says specifically, oh, it's spread through the bite. So she's trying to give a germ or a virological explanation to it. And in Day, no, I can't, no. I mean, it's not part of the story, right? I mean, it would be like, yeah, it's just not part of the story. It's taken as a given.
So then, since they just show up in the earlier movies, and I know in a lot of recent ones, like with The New Dawn of the Dead, 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks, and even though it's not a zombie movie per se, I Am Legend, same kind of idea. It's a virus, it's an infection, it's caused by us. Why do you think that shift happened, and what do you think it means? Okay.
I suppose it completes what I'm suggesting happened from the beginning. It completes the attempt to secularize this and make it non-magical. Now again, I would say at some point, and Max Brooks's book World War Z plays on this a lot, at some point you're just, and I was on a panel with Max once, and he does a great routine of trying to rationalize all this stuff. So no matter what anybody throws at him, he'll just say, well, scientists are investigating that. And it's all deadpan the whole time. But at some point you have to say, well, okay, wait a minute. This virus kills you. Well, that happens. Well, I understand that part. Okay, it kills you and makes you get up and walk around. That's a little thinner, but okay. All right, let's go with that. You're dead, so you're not metabolizing. All right, so what's moving your limbs then? If you're not burning calories, right? What's making them? So he said, oh, well, you're burning up your fat tissue. Okay, well, after a certain amount of time, you're going to run out of, and you're going to collapse. And it's like, well, no, but the virus preserves your tissues. I was like, what? You know? So at some point, if you're not saying it's magic, you're practically saying that. But I think that the intent is to rationalize it and make it not a supernatural being. It's a very modern thing, you know, and Resident Evil does that too. And there it brings in the nefarious corporation, right, which I like. And that's a peculiarly modern kind of fear. This globe-spanning, very hostile to human interest corporation. Sir? Oh, I'm sorry, was there something earlier? Sir?
Right now that you briefly mentioned Max Brooks for World War Z, I was trying to figure out a question is, from all the zombie culture stuff that I've seen or read or anything like that, I feel like Max Brooks is the only one that's really given full thought about what the recovery process would be.
Yeah.
In the midst of an apocalypse and whatnot.
Yep.
And I just want to know what your thoughts were on how he approached that in World War Z.
I mean, that is his stock and trade, is to play it more as appealing to what I would say was my first attraction, and what any adolescent male's first attraction is to zombie movies, is what would I do in that situation, right? And you're planning out your escape route. You're packing your bug-out bag. You're discussing with your friends what caliber is best. I mean, he has a long discussion in, I think it's actually in the survival guide. He said, you don't need big caliber weapons. You just a 22, right? Because it doesn't have to go out the back, right? It just has to enter the front of the skull. So I mean, minute details. He loves discussing those, and zombie fans love hearing it. So I enjoy that aspect for what it is. Narratively, or in terms of the weight or the meaning of the book, the one thing I fault World War Z for is it seems like at the end we haven't learned anything. And it's just like, oh, yay, you know, the US and Israel are back on top. We killed all those bad zombies. I guess at that point, somebody, I think it's supposed to be Dick Cheney is living at the South Pole because we've banished him there. And I did like that aspect, but I didn't see a lot of social transformation, right? I just saw like we got rid of the menace, and then we could just go back to being our usual capitalist selves. Was that?
Well, I was looking more specifically towards, there's a certain chapter in the book, Homefront USA, where they're talking specifically about here in the US and how they're recovering. On the west side of the Rockies, you get all those comments from people that used to be CEOs or you know, CFOs of companies and such, and they're stuck doing manual labor, and just how in the midst of all that, they're still griping about the fact that they're having to do blue collar work.
Right. Okay. So there's some social class inversion that they're still not happy with, even though they're alive. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. That I would take a little bit more seriously as an interesting commentary. But again, zombie fans like the fact that, you know, at one point in the book he describes how people live now in houses built on stilts, you know, since the zombies can't get in. I was like, he just loves those details.
Well, my initial question was, what, if anything, do you make of the sort of meta, what would I do, and planning the escape route, and the bag of gear that you grab? Apparently, I mean, I've never been an adolescent male, so maybe I'm missing something that's obvious to most of the rest of the audience.
Yeah, that would,
I mean,
no.
Is it just...
Yep. As I recall, that's all there is to it. Yeah. Now again, you grow up and you think about these things some more, and you know, I mean, maybe you don't. You know, there are some things from your adolescence you go back to and revisit and look at in some more deeper way, and there's some things you don't. Right? I don't know. Rock'em Sock'em Robots, right? That was pretty simple, you know. But this, I think, I came back to later, and I saw something new there. But I still understand the adolescent urge.
With the domestication of zombies like Bob and Day of the Dead, and, zombies gaining reason and men of the dead, what would you say about a mind-numbing creature gaining reason through natural being taught?
What was the adjective you used? A mind?
Mind-numbing creature.
Okay.
Or without reason. Like gaining reason by itself or being taught.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I see where that's going. You know, I suppose with the zombies, it's actually not as hard to answer as it would be like with Planet of the Apes, right? Because at least with the zombies, you could say, well, they were human, and when they were human, they had reason, and now they're just sort of learning it back, or it's stunted or something. But I guess Planet of the Apes went further and said a species that we would have said a few generations ago that doesn't have reason is now getting more of it. But I think you're going to see that. I don't think we can say anymore humans have reason and other things don't. I don't think that distinction is going to hold anymore. So things have less reason, less rational capabilities, let's say, than humans, but it's going to be a continuum, and I think you're right, things may move up or down the continuum. That doesn't, I can see where to the old medieval ladder or chain of being that would pose problems, but it doesn't to me as a modern. In fact, I'll be happy to meet some nice, smart zombies who've learned not to eat flesh. I'll prefer them to some people. You know, that's kind of the point. Kind of the point with Bub, right? Bub is much preferable to either Rhodes or Frankenstein in that movie. Sir?
I'm still a little troubled by thinking of these creatures as something with no reason and just desire. We see them maybe acting according to drives or sort of mass consumer culture, but isn't desire when you're attracted by something? And so to say that these are creatures acting according to desire, it seems to me we're losing the most important part about thinking about what desire is, which is responding to a beautiful thing. I don't see them responding to any, I don't know about any film, but they're not responding to anything, are they?
Well, they have objects of their desire. I'm not...
Like what?
The stuff in the mall.
So they are attracted by particular things.
Well, I mean, it might be the way, you know, they have very short attention spans. So yes, you can, they'll be, and as we are when we go to the mall, you may be very attracted to one thing, oh, sale, right? So you're easily distracted, but you have an object at any particular moment. So yeah, I mean, that mechanically would be what's happening.
If I could make a suggestion picking up on what would you do theme.
Okay. That's not where I thought you'd go with it.
The talk emphasized very much the sort of social commentary and criticism comment, and it seems that's wholly appropriate when we talk about George Romero, and that's clearly very central to what he wants to do with his films. It seems to me a lot of really simpler zombie films, just the sheer exploring of the scenario is maybe more central. And that was helpful to me because one of the things that's always sort of puzzled me about zombie films is how many humans, even well into the scenario, behaved really stupidly. It seems to me that that's actually sort of satisfying for us as an audience member to sort of think, well, however bad this was, I wouldn't do that really dumb, obviously self-destructive, suicidal thing. The suggestion I wanted to have was, you said that one of the things that zombie films speak to is our fear of people we know. So one reason this isn't just a question of the mysterious other is because more typically it's an infection that spreads and threatens us through those closest to us. I guess my suggestion was maybe also part of what's going on is zombie films speak to an anxiety about awareness of interreliance. So part of it is dealing with zombie threats, but also part of it is surviving in a world where usually everyone has their own specific job, and we're not very good at doing all the things we would need to do to survive by ourselves or in small groups. One of the things I thought was very interesting about 28 Days Later was just surviving on candy bars.
Right.
I mean, it's not even the zombie stuff, but just learning to make do in a world which wasn't well designed for that. So I was wondering if we've talked about sort of the pod people and sort of Richard Matheson stuff, but I wondered if in some ways this wasn't also partly just feeding into that more general post-apocalyptic scenarios. How would they survive even if they weren't zombies? Just me and a husk of a civilization.
Right. Oddly, the zombie films are about. Yeah, I think I can say this. They're about dysfunctional tiny communities. And as you say, you constantly are correcting them in your head and thinking, well, no, I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't demand that I was in charge, and thereby bring about the zombies breaking in. I wouldn't drink. What does Steve drink all of? He drinks all the booze in the Dawn remake and piss everybody off, and then lock them out. So it is about. I mean, what's funny about and I think you're right. It would go for any apocalyptic scenario. Is that you're going to have to get along with other people, and in the case of zombie movies, I've seen it summarized. It doesn't matter how big of a badass you are, you got to sleep, and while you're asleep, you have to have somebody you can trust watching the door. So even though survivalist scenarios often look like they're about this lone wolf, heavily armed black belt Green Beret guy. They're really about the building up of these communities of and usually they're populated by terribly ordinary people. Because presumably the Green Berets were probably sent in to kill the zombies first, so they died in greater numbers than the rest of us. So it's an odd community building exercise.
I guess my suggestion was part of it is a small community of people who aren't very good at being a small community,
right.
But also in an environment which was built for large communities. And so part of it's just the sheer mismatch between trying to survive as a small unit.
Oh yeah.
In the remains of a city designed for 1 million people.
Definitely. You would do much better in the wilderness, I'm sure. Yeah.
I think we can take one more question.
Mine's about zombie video games.
Okay.
With the Left 4 Dead series, it seems very very much like John Romero or
George.
Romero influenced it because you go through with 4 people of different backgrounds, and succeed at the end, fly away, or float away. But when you play through the game, if it's just you playing or if it's you and your buddy playing, the other computer players, because there has to be 4, almost seem to work against you at times, just by how stupid they are, which seems to be a trait of these films.
Okay.
I mean, at first it seemed to me like bad programming, because there's this one type of zombie that's a one-hit knockdown.
Right.
As soon as it hits you, you're down.
Okay.
But it almost seems like they planned them to be that stupid, to show human flaw in the group, because you and your other companion player have a higher level of thinking and try to plan ahead, but at the same time you have these 2 lower level thinking players that really aren't players.
And does the AI improve if you play long enough?
No.
Okay, so it's just locked in.
Yeah. I think the idea was that you're supposed to almost babysit these two.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what CJ says at the end of the Dawn remake, that he's been babysitting everybody and rather courageously sacrifices himself for the group at that point. But yeah, that sounds like a likely thing that's been built into the. I don't know if video games have narratives. I guess they do, sort of. I mean, as you say, there's a storyline that you go through. It's a pretty simple storyline. Just blast your way through to the helicopter or whatever it is at the end. And I agree that the game has a very. It looks like Land of the Dead types urban settings, and you have to go through a mall at one point, right?
And Left 4 Dead 2, you have to go through.
Left 4 Dead 2, you go through the mall. Okay. So even with something as simple as the programming of the computer players, it could simulate having a bad shot in the group. Yeah. Now the thing I really objected to in that game was having boss fight type zombies, which they do in Resident Evil 2, I guess. Because there's no boss. There's no zombie that when you shoot it explodes and infects everybody in the group. What are they called in that one? Like boomers. Yeah. That I thought was silly. Well, like you can call anything silly in a zombie movie.
And thank you for attending tonight. Hope to see you next year.
Next year.